Janet's true story. When your daughter-in-law treats you like a bank account, Janet never imagined that the woman her son chose to marry would be the same woman who would drain her bank account, dismantle her dignity, and leave her sitting alone in a foreclosed house in Tucson, wondering where 30 years of sacrifice had gone. But before the arguments and the missing money and the silence that swallowed her whole, Janet was just a woman trying to do right by her child. She spent 32 years building a life in a quiet Arizona suburb, raising her son alone after her husband passed, pouring every ounce of love and savings into giving him the future she never had. She never asked for recognition. She simply gave, because that is what she believed a mother was supposed to do. But when her son married a woman named Clarissa, the family she had sacrificed everything to protect became the very thing that nearly destroyed her. This is the story of how one grandmother learned the hardest lesson about boundaries, financial manipulation, and the painful courage it takes to say no more to the people you love most. To understand how deeply Clarissa's arrival changed everything, you first have to understand who Janet was before any of it. Janet married young. She was 19 when she said yes to Robert, a construction worker with sunburned hands and a laugh that could fill a room. They weren't wealthy. Robert worked long shifts framing walls on developments spreading across the Tucson desert, and Janet kept their small home running with the precision that only women who count every dollar truly understand. They had one son, Marcus, and for a while life was simple and enough. Then Robert died. A scaffolding collapse on a commercial job site took him on an ordinary Tuesday when Marcus was 7. And just like that, Janet became a widow, a single mother, and the sole provider for a boy who kept asking when his dad was coming home. The life insurance payout was modest enough to keep the house, enough to breathe for a few months, but not enough to build a future on, so she went to work. During the day, Janet served lunches in a school cafeteria. At night, after Marcus was tucked into bed with a neighbor watching over him, she cleaned office buildings downtown, vacuuming carpets in empty conference rooms, wiping desks belonging to people who earned in a week what she earned in a month. She never remarried, not because the loneliness didn't ache, but because every hour spent on a relationship felt like an hour stolen from Marcus. He was her priority, her entire reason for getting up at 5 and not sitting down until 11 at night. She drove the same car past 200,000 miles. She skipped vacations, wore clothes until the fabric thinned at the elbows, ate rice and beans so Marcus could have fresh fruit in his lunchbox. Every month she set aside what she could, $20 here, $50 there. By the time Marcus walked across that graduation stage while Janet wept in the bleachers, she had saved just over $180,000. For a woman earning what she earned, it was remarkable. 30 years of skipped meals and second shifts and saying no to herself so she could say yes to him. She helped him through community college and then a state university, co-signed his first apartment lease, and watched him graduate with a degree in logistics and a job that paid more than both her jobs combined. For the first time in decades, she felt her work was done. Slowly, Janet began to think about herself. Maybe she could see the Grand Canyon properly. Maybe she could fix the leaking roof, repaint the kitchen, plant flowers in the front yard. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream small, quiet dreams about her own life. Then Marcus met Clarissa at a friend's backyard barbecue, and everything began to shift. Clarissa was charming, beautiful, in a way that turned heads, with a warm smile and a voice that made you feel like the only person in the room. She called Janet Mom, without hesitation, brought her flowers, asked about her garden, and Janet, who had spent 3 decades giving love without receiving much in return, felt her heart open wide. But charm, as she would eventually learn, can be the most expensive thing a person ever encounters. Janet welcomed Clarissa with open arms, having no way of knowing those arms would soon be emptied of everything she had worked a lifetime to hold. To understand how Clarissa became the center of Janet's world, you have to understand where Clarissa came from. She grew up in a household where the electricity got shut off twice a year, but the family never missed a Sunday brunch at the nicest restaurant in town. Her father leased cars they couldn't afford. Her mother carried credit cards that were maxed out before the billing cycle ended. There were eviction notices tucked into kitchen drawers and repossessed vehicles quietly replaced by new ones on fresh loans. But the family always looked good. They always performed stability. Clarissa learned something from that childhood that most people never articulate, but many instinctively understand. Appearance is currency. If you look like you belong, people will let you in. And if you make people feel good about letting you in, they will hand you the keys. When Clarissa met Marcus, she saw a man with a steady paycheck and a kind heart, but more than that, she saw Janet. She saw a woman who lived modestly, who had savings, who had no husband to split her attention, and no other children to divide her generosity. She saw opportunity dressed up as family. The love bombing began almost immediately. Clarissa started calling Janet Mom within the first few weeks of dating Marcus. She brought flowers to Janet's doorstep on random Tuesdays. She remembered Janet's birthday not with a simple card, but with an elaborate handwritten letter that made Janet cry takai at her kitchen table. She invited Janet to brunches, to shopping trips, to long afternoon conversations over coffee, where she asked Janet about her life, her dreams, her late husband Robert. And here is the part that breaks your heart. Clarissa listened. She listened to Janet talk about Robert's illness, about the years of caregiving, about the loneliness that followed. She cried with Janet. She held her hand across the table and told her she was the strongest woman she had ever met. Janet had not heard those words from anyone in years, maybe ever. Janet told her coworker Linda one morning, her voice soft with wonder, "I finally have a daughter." She said it like a prayer that had been answered. And in that moment, she meant it completely. The walls Janet had built around herself, the quiet boundaries she had maintained through years of surviving alone, dissolved. She did not even realize she had walls until Clarissa walked through them. Marcus proposed after 8 months. Clarissa wanted what she called a proper wedding. She showed Janet Pinterest boards filled with floral arrangements and venue photographs, table settings, and designer dresses. The estimated cost was $35,000. Marcus made decent money as a logistics coordinator, but he did not have that kind of savings. One evening at dinner, Clarissa mentioned the numbers casually, almost as an aside, the way someone might mention the weather. She did not ask Janet for anything. She did not have to. Janet offered before the silence could settle. $15,000, she said. Consider it a gift. Clarissa hugged her so tightly that Janet could feel her trembling. She cried into Janet's shoulder and whispered, "You are the most generous person I have ever known." The wedding ended up costing $42,000. Janet covered $23,000 of it. She wrote the checks with a steady hand and told herself this was a one-time thing. This was her son's wedding. This was what mothers do. It was not a one-time thing. After the wedding, the requests continued, and each one sounded perfectly reasonable on its own. Clarissa and Marcus needed a security deposit for a nicer apartment. "For when grandchildren come, Mom," Clarissa said with a smile that made Janet's chest ache with hope. Then Clarissa's car started having problems. It was unsafe, she said, especially if she was going to be driving future grandchildren around. Janet helped with the down payment on a new one. Then there was the cosmetology course Clarissa wanted to take, a path toward financial independence, she promised. Janet paid the tuition. Clarissa attended 3 classes and never went back. Every request came wrapped in warmth, in affection, in words that made Janet feel essential. "You are the only one who understands us. We would be lost without you. We will pay you back when things settle down." Nothing was ever paid back. Janet kept a mental tally, but never spoke it out loud. By the end of the first year of Marcus and Clarissa's marriage, that tally had reached nearly $52,000. Janet noticed her savings account shrinking. She noticed the numbers getting smaller each time she checked. But she told herself a story that made the math easier to ignore. This is what family does. She remembered the years of eating alone, of spending holidays with no one to call, of coming home to silence. She did not want Marcus to struggle the way she had, and Clarissa made her feel needed, included, loved. The money felt like a small price to pay for belonging. If you are listening to this and you recognize something familiar in Janet's story, that quiet trade of savings for affection, of financial security for emotional inclusion, then you already know why this pattern is so dangerous. It does not feel like exploitation when it is happening. It feels like love. It feels like family. And that is exactly what makes it so hard to see and even harder to stop. For a while, Janet could pretend the math didn't matter. But numbers don't lie, and eventually, neither could Janet's bank statements. Then the baby came. Little Lily arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and when Janet held her for the first time, something cracked open in her chest that she thought had sealed shut years ago. This tiny, warm, breathing miracle, her granddaughter. Janet could barely see through her tears. She bought everything for the nursery: the crib, the stroller, the car seat, the onesies in every color, the soft blankets, the mobile that played lullabies. Another $4,000, gone before she even thought to count. But who counts when they are holding their grandchild? Who looks at a receipt when they are looking at that face? For a few weeks it was beautiful. Janet visited often. She held Lily while Clarissa napped. She sang the same songs she had once sung to Marcus when he was small enough to fit in one arm. She thought, this is it. This is what all of it was for. The money, the sacrifice, the loneliness, it all led here, to this little girl. But Clarissa had learned something new. She had learned that Lily was not just a baby. Lily was a key that could open any door she wanted. It started subtly, the way it always did with Clarissa. Lily needs a bigger space. Lily needs to be in a safe neighborhood. You wouldn't want your granddaughter growing up in a cramped apartment, would you, Janet? The sweetness was gone now. The requests no longer came wrapped in warmth or gratitude. They came wrapped in guilt, in implication, in the quiet threat that Janet's access to Lily depended entirely on her willingness to keep paying. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Clarissa and Marcus had found a house, $280,000. They needed $30,000 for the down payment. Clarissa told Janet over the phone, not in person, not over dinner, not even with a please, just a statement delivered like an invoice. Marcus said you'd help. Janet's stomach dropped. She sat at her kitchen table and stared at the wall. Her savings account had fallen below $90,000. She was 61 years old. That money was her retirement. That money was supposed to carry her through the years when her body would slow down and her paycheck would stop. She told Clarissa she needed time to think about it. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and sharp. When Clarissa spoke again, her voice had changed, cold, clipped, unfamiliar. I thought family helped family. And then she hung up. Clarissa did not call for 2 weeks, neither did Marcus. The silence was suffocating. Janet checked her phone constantly, the way someone checks a wound. Finally, Marcus called once, awkwardly, his voice tight with discomfort. "Mom, Clarissa's really hurt." Janet could hear it in his tone, the careful phrasing, the rehearsed quality of it. He had been coached, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Janet gave them $28,000. She wrote the check at her kitchen table, and then she put her head in her hands and wept. Not softly, not briefly. She cried the way people cry when they know they have just done something they cannot undo. She cried because she knew this was wrong, and she did it anyway. Because the alternative, losing Lily, losing Marcus, losing the only family she had felt worse than poverty. After that check cleared, Janet stopped sleeping through the night. She would lie awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, doing math in her head. She went to her doctor for the first time in years. High blood pressure, early signs of anxiety disorder. The doctor asked if anything stressful was happening at home. Janet said no. She stopped attending her church group not because she had lost her faith, but because she could no longer afford to bring a dish to the potluck. She was ashamed. The isolation that Clarissa's charm had once cured was now deeper than ever. But this time, Janet had paid for her own loneliness. 8 months after the house purchase, Clarissa called again. She wanted a kitchen renovation, $12,000, and for the first time in years, Janet said no. She did not say it with anger. She said it gently, the way you deliver bad news to someone you love. "I just can't right now, sweetheart." Clarissa exploded. She called Janet selfish. She said Janet had plenty of money sitting around doing nothing. She accused Janet of loving her money more than her own granddaughter. And Marcus sat somewhere in that house, on that phone line, breathing. Janet could hear him. He was there. He heard every word. And he said nothing. That silence broke something in Janet that no amount of money ever could. Her son's silence told her everything his words never had. After that night, visits with Lily were canceled. "Lily has a cold. We're busy this weekend. Maybe next month." Janet sent gifts. They were never acknowledged. She drove to their house once, unannounced, desperate. Clarissa met her at the front door and said Marcus was sleeping. But Lily was there in the window, waving her small hand. Janet waved back, then sat in her car in the driveway and cried for 20 minutes. She did not drive away immediately. She could not. She just sat there, watching the window where her granddaughter had been, wondering how love had brought her here to a driveway she had helped pay for, outside a house she had funded, being turned away from a child she adored. Janet had spent her life believing that love meant giving without limits. But she was about to learn that some people don't see love, they see an open vault. It was Dorothy who broke the spell. Dorothy, Janet's oldest friend, a retired bank teller with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. They were having coffee on a Wednesday morning when Dorothy mentioned it casually. "Saw your daughter-in-law at that new resort spa out on Camelback," she said. "The one that charges $400 a day." Janet set her mug down slowly. Something cold moved through her chest. She smiled, changed the subject, and finished her coffee. But when she got home, she opened her phone and found Clarissa's Instagram public, hiding nothing, because Clarissa had never believed Janet would look. Photo after photo, designer handbags on marble countertops, manicured nails holding champagne glasses, weekend getaways to Sedona, San Diego, places Janet had never been. Clarissa's life told a story that had nothing to do with struggle or needing help. The cosmetology course Janet had given $2,000 to complete had never been finished. That same month, Clarissa had been in Las Vegas with friends, posting from a rooftop pool. Then Janet saw the comment from Clarissa's sister beneath a photo of shopping bags. "Living your best life. Mother-in-law money hits different, lol." Janet read it 3 times. Each reading sharpened the pain. She closed the app and sat in perfect silence, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, clarity, the terrible, burning clarity of someone who finally understands they've been used. But the worst discovery was still waiting. 2 weeks later, Janet applied for a small loan to fix her leaking roof. She had always had excellent credit, decades of careful budgeting and on-time payments. The loan was denied. Her credit score had dropped nearly 200 points. On her full credit report, she found a credit card she had never opened, carrying a balance of $8,400. The billing address was Marcus and Clarissa's house. Janet's hands shook as she held the paper. She didn't know if Clarissa had done it alone or if Marcus had known. She didn't know which answer would destroy her more. She filed a dispute with the credit bureau, but did not file a police report. Even now, she was still protecting her son. The following Tuesday, Janet drove to their house when she knew Clarissa would be at work. She brought a folder containing the credit report, Instagram screenshots, and a handwritten list of every dollar given over 3 years with dates, reasons, and the lies told to justify each one. The total, just over $47,000. She sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table she had helped pay for, in the house she had helped buy. She laid everything out piece by piece without raising her voice. Marcus looked at the floor. He did not deny it. "First," he said, "she told me you offered. Then, she said you had more than you needed. Then the words that cut deepest, 'Mom, what do you want me to do? She's my wife.'" Janet looked at her son, this man she had raised alone, worked double shifts to feed, loved beyond reason, and understood with absolute finality. Marcus was not a villain. He was a coward. And cowardice, in its quiet way, is its own kind of cruelty. She closed the folder. "I love you. I will always love you, but I will not let anyone destroy what I built with my own 2 hands. She told him about the credit card and that she was considering legal action. Marcus cried and begged her not to. She said, "You had a chance to protect me and you chose not to. Now I have to protect myself." She drove home in silence. That night, Clarissa called, furious. She threatened to keep Lily away, called Janet a bitter old woman, said she would tell everyone Janet was senile. Janet listened to every threat, every ugly word. When silence finally came, she said one sentence: "I've already contacted a lawyer." For the first time in 3 years, Clarissa had nothing to say. Janet had finally drawn the line. But drawing a line and holding it are two very different things, and the hardest part of her journey was just beginning. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Torres, and she specialized in something Janet had never known, had a name: elder financial exploitation. Janet resisted that word at first. It felt too criminal, too far from the world of family and love she had once inhabited. But Rebecca was honest. What Clarissa had done, opening a credit card in Janet's name, running up $11,000 in unauthorized charges, was fraud, and it needed to be reported. The dispute process was long and exhausting: phone calls that lasted hours, forms requiring signatures, statements that had to be notarized. Rebecca told her to document everything, every text, every transaction, every date. Janet bought a notebook with a plain blue cover and titled the first page, "The Truth." For weeks, that notebook became her constant companion, a record not just of what had been taken, but of what she refused to forget. Her financial picture was sobering. A financial advisor named Helen sat with her and laid out the numbers. Janet had roughly $47,000 left. After a lifetime of work, decades of saving, raising a son, and burying a husband, $47,000 was what remained. But Helen told her something Janet held on to like a rope thrown into deep water. She was not ruined. That money, managed carefully alongside her Social Security, could still support a modest retirement. There would be no vacations, no generous gifts at Christmas. But Janet could live. She could stay in her home. She was bruised, but not broken. The grief, though, was something else entirely. Janet grieved in a way that had no greeting card, no funeral to mark its beginning. She grieved for Sunday dinners where Marcus would laugh and say nobody made green child casserole like his mom. She grieved for Lily's birthdays she might now miss. She grieved for the boy who used to pick dandelions from the backyard and present them like roses, his small hands dirty, his smile certain he was giving her something precious. She mourned him the way you mourn someone who has died, even though they are still breathing. She found a support group online for estranged grandparents and expected a handful of sad stories. Instead, she found thousands of families shattered by exactly this dynamic. She learned words she had never encountered: enmeshment, boundaries. They felt foreign at first, but the more she used them, the more she understood they were survival tools she had needed for years. And then there were the people who showed up. Janet's church friends, the ones she had been avoiding, found out bits and pieces. They did not judge her. Dorothy started driving her to therapy every Tuesday without being asked, sitting in the parking lot with a paperback, never making Janet feel like a burden. The women from Bible study brought casseroles and sat on her porch, letting silence be enough when words were too heavy. A younger woman named Maya, who had survived something similar with her own in-laws, became an unexpected friend. She never said, "You should have known." She simply said, "I believe you." And those 3 words held more healing than Janet could have imagined. Janet began to notice something. In pulling away from her son's toxic dynamic, she had accidentally made room for people who gave without invoices, who loved without conditions, who never kept score. She fixed her roof after her credit was restored. She painted her bedroom sage green, a color she had always wanted but never chosen because Gerald preferred beige. She adopted a fat orange tabby named Biscuit who purred on her pillow like a small engine. She started a vegetable garden, tomatoes, peppers, basil. These things might sound small against the backdrop of fraud and betrayal, but each one was a quiet act of defiance, a declaration that her life was still hers, that she was still worth investing. If you recognize yourself in Janet's story, if you have felt the slow drain of being someone's financial safety net, while being told it is love, hear this. Generosity has limits. Saying no to your child is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Silence is not peace, it is complicity. Document everything. Never co-sign emotional blackmail. These are not abstract lessons. They are written in Janet's empty bank statements and the tears she cried in a parked car outside her granddaughter's house. Janet's story could have ended in bitterness. But Janet was never bitter, she was tired. And tired women, when they finally rest, sometimes find a clarity that the busy and comfortable never do. 18 months passed. 18 months of silence between a mother and her only son. 18 months of Janet learning to live inside the quiet she had chosen. And then one Tuesday afternoon, a text message appeared on her screen. Just 3 words from Marcus. "Mom, I'm sorry." Janet stared at that message for a long time. She didn't reply right away. She had learned that speed was not the same as sincerity, and that her first instinct to comfort and forgive was exactly the instinct that had cost her everything. 2 days later, she called him back. Marcus was living in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Tucson. He and Clarissa had separated. The marriage had collapsed under the very weight Janet had been carrying for years: debt, dishonesty, a pattern of manipulation that Clarissa had never confined to just one target. Credit cards opened in Marcus's name, loans taken against things he didn't know they owned. A web of financial deceit so tangled that Marcus only saw it clearly once Janet was no longer there to cushion the fall. He was in therapy, working at a hardware store, rebuilding his credit. He did not ask for money, he asked for forgiveness. And Janet listened with the careful attention of a woman who had been burned but had not lost her ability to love. She didn't rush to tell him it was okay. It was not okay, but she didn't hang up either. They started meeting for coffee once a week at a small diner near Janet's house. The conversations were careful, halting, honest in a way they had never been before. They were rebuilding not the old relationship, built on Janet's silence and Marcus's willful blindness, but something with walls and doors and boundaries that both of them respected. Clarissa moved in with her sister. After losing the house, she couldn't keep up with payments without Janet's subsidies. She posted on social media about being a single mom warrior, never mentioning the money she took or the mother-in-law she exploited. Janet doesn't follow her online. Some stories don't require a satisfying ending. They just require distance. Not every manipulator faces a dramatic reckoning. Sometimes they simply move on to the next willing heart. The lesson was never about karma. It was about protecting yourself, regardless of whether fairness ever arrives. And then there is Lily. She is 4 now. Janet has seen her a handful of times, through Marcus's supervised visits, brief hours in park playgrounds and fast food restaurants. Lily doesn't really remember her grandmother, That fact sits like a stone in Janet's chest that never fully dissolves. But Janet sends birthday cards. And she has started a small savings account for Lily, not through Clarissa, but through a trust with clear, ironclad rules. If she ever needs it, it will be there. But this time, it's protected. She has learned, at a cost most people never pay, that love without structure is just fuel for someone else's fire. I didn't lose my money because I was stupid, Janet says. I lost it because I was lonely, and someone knew exactly how to use that loneliness against me. If you recognize yourself in my story, if someone in your family makes you feel like your love is only as valuable as your last check, please hear me. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say no. That is not selfish. That is survival. Janet's story ends where her life now lives on a small porch in Tucson, with biscuit on her lap, the desert sky stretching in every direction. She is not rich. She is not whole in the way she once imagined. But she is free, solvent, surrounded by people who love her without invoices attached. Her relationship with Marcus is quieter, smaller, more honest than it ever was. It is not perfect, but it is real, and no one is charging her for it. Janet's story is not unique. That is both the tragedy and the power of it. Somewhere right now, another Janet is writing another check, believing it is the price of love. If this story reaches even one of them in time, every painful word was worth telling, because the most expensive thing in the world isn't money, it's silence, and Janet, after everything, has finally broken hers.